Hello YouTube, it's Arid here. It has been, wow, like 4 years maybe since I did an autism video. Oh boy, I don't know if any of these are gonna do nearly as well as that one I did all those years ago did, but we'll see. Anyway, so this is a video I kind of meant to make like back in 2021. I've had the script sitting on my Google Drive for 3 years now, and I haven't done anything with it. I think I just left it sitting there. Like, I thought I was gonna complete it at some point, but never did. Plus, I've just been too lazy to sit down and record. But now I'm not doing much with my life right now, and I have all this free time, so I might as well. Anyway, so this video is essentially going to be my 2024 take on being autistic in the furry community, in the furry fandom, and yeah, a lot has changed in the 5.5 years that have passed since I made that video, which, by the way, holy crap, 3,000 views. Never would have seen that coming. I thank you guys so much for watching that, and I'm glad some people have learned a thing or two from that. I've made a good handful of friends and acquaintances, and some of them have stuck to this day. Like, one of them is sort of local to me and is one of my closer friends. So yeah, definitely got a lot of reach out of that video. I'm really thankful for it. Yeah, so I guess let's get started with the topic that this video is about. So back when I made this video in 2019, I was still only 17. I'd never been to a con or a meet. I'd never met a furry before, one face to face. But now I have my second fursuit. I just sold off my first one, but I have this one, which is a full suit, which I'm not planning on wearing in any videos, sorry. But yeah, I have this. I've been to a ton of cons and meets. I have all this brand new experience in the fandom, and my understanding of myself, the community, and my place in it has really transformed through these years that I've been seeing people and going to events. Say some things there have been some additions to my experience, some subtractions, some things switched around, yeah, my perspective on being autistic in the fandom has really shifted in a lot of ways, but in other ways not so much. Some things have stayed more or less the same since I was just a lonely soul scrolling through Twitter and Fur Affinity and the like back in the pre-COVID days, back during high school. Yeah, so I suppose now we can get into some commentary on my old video that I made all those years ago. Some things that have some kind of additional points onto like what all I talked about in that. So it's worth noting all autistic people are different. You know the saying, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. All of our experiences, while sharing many similarities in different specific areas, the whole thing combined, my experience as an autistic person and as an autistic furry is not going to be the same as yours, and it's not going to be the same as someone else who may appear in the comments. Might not be the same as someone else who made a video on the same topic. It's not going to be identical at all. I might be able to relate on more or less from one person or another, but it's not going to be identical. So yeah, we all think and act somewhat different from another, or very different from another. Depends who you ask. There was a ton of us. It's a very big spectrum and a very big fandom. Like I said, different experiences. We've had different life events and different things happen to us that have shaped our perspective as being an autistic person or being a furry, or both. And we've had different methods of being introduced to the furry fandom. It's not going to be the sort of fetishistic fantasy that I was getting into in that other video. It's not going to be like that for everyone. A lot of people, like myself, the fantasy aspect was what drew me in, and I'm sure it's what drew a lot of other people in too. Like, they could either see themselves actually being that animal, and I mean, I'm not gonna get into the whole thing with like otherkin and Therians. That's its own discussion. I don't know enough about it, but yeah, some people just see that there's such a welcoming community here, and that's the main thing that got them into it. They just saw that this was a bunch of people that seemed to be accepting of so many different kinds of people, and that in itself was enough to help them escape a life of loneliness or not feeling like you have your place in the world. But here in Furry, no need to worry about any of that. This is, some people will just look at this from the outside and say, yes, that's my tribe, or that's potentially my tribe. What else? But yeah, some people were just might be really obsessed with a fictional character from a movie, TV show, book, video game, whatever piece of media. And I mean, here's one that might specifically tie into the autism stuff, but not like, it's often talked about just in general terms, but I think it ties a lot into specifically the autistic side of the community as well. People in the fandom are oftentimes brought together by their so-called weirdness, and some of us have very different beginnings from one another, but we still find ourselves in many of the same places throughout this journey in the furry fandom once they've established themselves. For example, for me, it's been a bit of a slow process that began in 2015 with, not going to mention that whole thing now, but you can go watch my other video if you want to know. So yeah, getting into the topic of this fandom being like super accepting, or at least they tell you it is. A lot of furries I've met, well, not everyone's wanted to necessarily be friends with me, which is, it's understandable. There are a ton of people out there. Not everyone's gonna be my type. I'm not gonna be everyone's type. and that's okay. I don't need to be friends with absolutely everyone. But people overall seem to be really welcoming. I mean, there are gonna be some people who are less so, who just seem to be hostile to new people, but those seem to be very much a minority. And if you try to talk to the majority of people in the fandom, they'll at least reciprocate. They'll understand where you're coming from and that you at least want to chat and get to know people. But yeah, they seem to generally be really understanding and accepting of us autistic people and our differences. I mean, a lot of them grew up in... A lot of them came from the same sort of background where they were misunderstood. I mean, not everyone. Some people had social lives that were plenty good, but a lot of us didn't, and that's one thing we're able to connect on, or at least feel empathy towards each other on. But yeah, one thing I would like to really touch upon that was mentioned in my last video was the terminology that was commonly used at the time to describe autism and the diagnosis and stuff along those lines. In the most recent video I did where I reacted to that old video, I think that this was like still 4 years ago, like sometime in 2020, I pointed out that the term Asperger's is now just flat out like, no, you cannot use that term. Like, I think they used to diagnose people with that at one point, but not anymore. That's well in the past, and just it's not acceptable to call it that anymore, because yeah, the guy it's named after, Hans Asperger, was... I'm not gonna go into the whole thing. Plenty of videos about that. Not a good guy. Not a good guy at all. Associated with some very, very bad people, and was a terrible person himself. He did really unacceptable things to people who were deemed to be mentally ill or whatever. It is just not good. Don't use the term Asperger's, please. There's a whole history to it, and there's a reason the community doesn't use it anymore. Also, this kind of ties into it, but functioning labels. Functioning labels are harmful to both supposedly high-functioning and low-functioning individuals. High-functioning because it basically erases our support needs, and that's essentially society telling us that we're fine, we don't need accommodations, we don't need support, we're high-functioning enough that we can just be part of society and just deal with things. Whereas with the supposed low-functioning bunch, it essentially infantilizes them. It makes them out to be like people who just aren't able to be themselves at all, and have to be like basically babied, treated like a child the whole way, and not allowed to pursue their passions or pursue much of a life at all. Don't know if I'm explaining that super well, but that's essentially what it is. And the more I've been in the fandom, the more I realize just how many other neurodivergent furs there are. Like, oh my god, like, I swear half of every furry I've met is either autistic or ADHD, I swear. And also there's some people who either don't know or won't say that they are, but I do highly suspect of it because of certain things I've picked up on them, like the way they speak or the things they're into or stuff along those lines. Yeah. So back when I made that video a million years ago, I recommended a series on, it was called The Truth About Asperger's Syndrome, because, I mean, that was years ago when it was still seen as okay to call it that, by a YouTuber by the name Max Darrett. Still a great series, at least at the time it seemed like a really great series, and I watched through the whole thing. I learned a ton about myself and other people like me from it, but I would not have that as my go-to right now, because there's a lot of outdated terminology, outdated ways of thought, and maybe not overly so, but still some things you can tell it's dated. And he also ran a podcast with some co-hosts. That podcast has long since terminated, and he hasn't done an autism video in a couple years now. He just does gaming content now, so, and I'm kind of sad to see the autism videos go. A couple channels I will recommend, and these are far from the only ones that I watch that are out there. Autism from the Inside does some really great videos explaining all the ins and outs of being autistic and finding support and such. Also, I really love the format of videos that Orion does. He just explains things so in depth and in a way that really gets me to understand the subject matter and in a way that I can really relate to, and I think it's given me a lot of ideas on how to manage my own life. Yeah. And the final thing I'd like to talk about is, unfortunately, there can be a little bit of a dark side to autism in the fandom. Thankfully, people like this are a rarity, and these are specific individuals who just have their own set of problems, and it may not specifically be down to them being autistic, but we've had people like Lumen City who's just caused all sorts of problems. There was a guy named Doppio that was trying to use his autism as an excuse for nearly getting people killed, literally, amongst other things that I won't get into. Former friend I had to cut him off, but I won't get into that either. And someone who abused me online some years back, also using autism as an excuse. People do terrible things online and will find any excuse to try and either defend themselves or play it down somewhat. And I think that's really not an okay thing to do, because it by saying it's because you're autistic, you're essentially throwing all autistic people under the bus by putting out there that that's just a thing that we do. That's just the autism doing its thing, and it's not. It's that's like, you screwing over people is a you problem, not an autism problem. Sorry, buddy. But yeah, that's all I've got to say. We got 20 minutes of recording. I'm gonna probably try and edit it down so it's less than that. I'm gonna hopefully edit some stuff in, like pictures and all. And hopefully I can make something of it. But yeah, that's all I've got to say. I don't know how often I'll be doing these. I had nothing better to do tonight, so I decided, why not sit down and record something. Yeah. Till next time. It's been Arid, and I'll see you sometime.